Good morning, everybody. This is Andrew Jordan, and I wanted to give you a presentation of a class that I taught on how to transliterate Hebrew words into English. What is transliterating, and how does it differ from translation? We're going to start by defining what transliteration is and understanding some theoretical background so that you can understand what is important to know about this topic and why it's important. We're going to analyze examples of different transliteration systems, and we will not be workshopping. This is something that I did for a separate occasion, but we could talk about some of the issues that would be important. So you might be thinking to yourself, why do we need transliteration? And you might think, where could we see transliteration? And do we even need it? And the answer to all those questions we will see soon enough. And we will see transliteration in many places. Let's start with the first question. Why do we need transliteration? There are a number of different ways that you would use transliteration. For example, for scholarship, for people who are learning language to understand how it's pronounced, for the ease of publications in Latin script. So when you were talking about transliteration, we're taking a language that is written in a script and we're transliterating it, putting it into our own Latin alphabet. So for example, we have the Hebrew alphabet, which is written right to left, is built around consonants only as an abjad, not an alphabet. And we are taking that and putting it into a Latin left to right script with vowels and consonants. There are going to be a number of problems with that when you decide to do that. But if we agree that it's something that we do need to do, then we could see that it could be helpful in certain cases, even though we're accepting the issues that we might have when we do this. So we could see in scholarship if we want to refer to words in Hebrew in a precise way. If people are the ones who learn how to pronounce it, they could use the transliteration to help them get started. If we do accept that transliteration is something that's desirable, we might decide that we could have several different kinds of transliteration for different purposes. Okay, we might have different transliteration systems for different languages. For example, the Hebrew letter het could be transliterated as ch in English or j in Spanish, for example. So now that we've broadly outlined what transliteration is, we could begin to unpack some theoretical issues that we need to understand in order to be able to approach this from an academic perspective. The first is to understand narrow versus broad transliteration, which is basically if you consider a spectrum of degrees to which you are transliterating text. A narrow transliteration is going to be the most detailed and the most close to the Hebrew original, but it is still an approximation. A broad transliteration system is less detailed correspondence to the original, but more accessible to more people. And the broad popular transliteration is the most broadest way that you can transliterate for the least amount of specialization and the broadest populations of people. In this case, since we're talking about Hebrew, including non-Jewish people who don't use Hebrew in their religious or other purposes. And we have to unpack the difference between transliteration and romanization. Transliteration is a temporary, ad hoc, sometimes, thing that is used in certain specific cases, whereas romanization is a proposal to replace a script with the Latin alphabet, which was the case in Israel in the early 20th century. There were proposals to romanize the Hebrew alphabet and the Hebrew language, but it ultimately did not occur. Now let's consider transliteration versus transcription, which are two things that are related. Transcription is an exact phonetic representation of sounds as they are pronounced. This is used by linguists to document the pronunciation of sounds. If one is studying how something is pronounced, you need to have a system to record in writing how something is pronounced, which can be used for a variety of purposes. If you're studying a new language or studying dialects of a language, you could find this useful to document in writing how something is pronounced. This is also used in dictionaries to help people who are learning language to understand how to pronounce a word. And so you can see here transcription of the Hebrew word written here, which I'm not going to pronounce, but I'm going to show you on the screen, or say the letters, sin, mem, het, he, and we're going to look down here, and you can see there are three different transcribed words, about that, which reflect different pronunciation. So a Sephardic pronunciation would be simha, with the het sound being kind of a breathy sound. We have traditional Ashkenazi pronunciation, which would be simcha, harsher het sound, but with a different vowel, simcha, ha, simha, in the Sephardic pronunciation, simha, in the Ashkenazi. And then modern Israeli Hebrew pronounces it simcha, with a very strong het sound, the ch, which is characteristic of modern Hebrew. And so the transcription shows you exactly how this is pronounced, with notes as to where the accent occurs and how each vowel is pronounced and how each consonant is pronounced. If you're just listening, it will be hard for you to see what I'm pointing out here, but hopefully that description was adequate enough for you to understand. Transliteration is different from transcription in that transliteration is a replacement of Hebrew alphabet characters called graphemes with Latin ones. So it does not use the same kind of symbols. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. So if we look at the same Hebrew word, sin, mem, het, he, we can transliterate this in a number of different ways into English, which you can see here. You can, the question you have is how to transliterate the letter het, which can be used with H with a dot underneath. That's used sometimes. CH, KH. You can also decide, do you need to transliterate the he at the end, which is not pronounced in Hebrew. But if you're transliterating, you might want to include a final H at the end to mark that. Also, how do you transliterate the vowels? Do you write an O to note Ashkenazi pronunciation versus an A for Israeli and Sephardic? There's also Arabic-inspired transliterations that use numerals to note the het sound versus the ch sound. And if you're translating to Spanish, you could use the J, simha, because the jota, the J sound, sounds like the ch in Spanish, different varieties, different pronunciations of that. Transcription relies on the International Phonetic Alphabet, which you can see on the screen right now, which uses a number of characters that are not found in the Roman alphabet, the Latin alphabet, but is inspired by it more or less. And this is going to detail precisely how to pronounce a certain sound. Essentially, so if you're looking on the screen, you can see it's broken down by here is the manner of pronunciation. And over here is where it's pronounced. So let's take a letter like the letter T. Okay, T is called a stop or a plosive because you're obstructing the air that comes from your mouth as you try to pronounce it. So when you say the letter T, your tongue is cutting off that airflow. And in English, the T is alveolar, which refers to kind of the roof of the mouth. T, you could say it yourself and hear that where your tongue naturally goes. If you're speaking Spanish, the T is going to be closer to your teeth, dental. So you're going to actually say te. You can hear the difference. T, te, and where the tongue goes when you pronounce it, okay? If you contrast the T and the D, the difference is voicing. Voicing refers to the vibration of your vocal cords. When you have the T, there's no vibration. And when you do the D, there is a vibration. You can hold your hand kind of on your throat. It works better if you use the th and the sound down here, represented by Greek and sort of Scandinavian letter. I think that's ev and theta. If you say like the th in think, there is no vibration in your vocal cords. If you say the th as in then or that, there is a vibration. Okay, hopefully that's makes sense. Hebrew transliteration is a very ancient, old problem, first found in the Septuagint, or the Septuagint as it's pronounced in Europe. And you can see this also in the Vulgate and other ancient translations where they try to represent Hebrew names into Greek or Latin alphabets. For example, Judea comes from the Greek word, or comes from the Latin Judea, I-U-D-E-A, which is Greek, Yoda, which comes from the Hebrew Yehuda. So you can see that transliteration happening. And this has evolved throughout time. Now there are 3 modern standards, which is the Society of Biblical Literature, and I have an example here. They have 2. They have an academic recommendation and a general recommendation. There's also the Academy of the Hebrew Language from Israel, and the International, I forget what this stands for, but the ISO 259 is a different system used to transliterate Hebrew into English. Okay, so if you're watching the video, you can see on the screen I have an example which is taken from Wikipedia, to be fair, but it presents a number of problems with inconsistent transliteration. So here you can see the sentences for Hanukkah at the synagogue in Bet She'er Hayim. Isaac donned his tallis that Yitzhak gave him from Bet Kehila in Safat, Israel. So we have a number of problems with this. And if you're not familiar with Hebrew, it might be difficult for you to really follow some of this, but I'm going to say the Hebrew letters and you can kind of follow along. So Hanukkah is written with a chet. So it's really meant to have that ch sound at the beginning. Hanukkah or Chanukah, depending on your your pronunciation tradition. There we go. So Hanukkah is written with a regular H. Chaim is written with a CH. Yitzhak is written with a CH, even though it's a chet. We also have the letter Sadi, which is written TZ here in Yitzhak, or TS here in Safat. It's the same letter in Hebrew. In the letter Tav, we are pronouncing it the modern way, T here, Bet Kehila, but in the name of the synagogue, it's written Beth, which is an older pronunciation, TH. And also we have here Talis, which is an Ashkenazi pronunciation of the letter Taf, the same letter. So there's a number of issues here, which is what is called in the scholarly literature mixing of areas, which is when you're mixing different systems together, and inconsistent transliteration, essentially. And we have another problem with transliteration, which is called spelling pronunciation, which is when you associate a Latin character with its phonetic value in your language with what you're trying to transliterate. For example, you might have, if you've seen the names of synagogues, you might have seen this a lot with the word Yeshurun, which is written with a J in older synagogue names. And this comes from German, which uses the J to sound the Y sound, Yod. So this would actually have been pronounced Adat Yeshurun, and the German would have understood that, but in English we would say Adath Jeshurun or something like that, unless you know what you're kind of some Hebrew. And this is something that occurs with the names of Hebrew prophets and characters in the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible in English, like Jeremiah is actually would have been pronounced Jeremiah in the German transliteration system, but we don't pronounce it that way because the J is used differently in our language. So another, I'm just going to skip that actually for now. So what we have is the narrow versus broad transliteration. And what this is referring to is how specific do you want to go with your transliteration, which we were talking about a second ago. And the Society of Biblical Literature has both a narrow and broad transliteration system to distinguish who the audience is, essentially. So if you're dealing with a scholarly audience, you're going to want a narrow transliteration that includes all of the details in the pronunciation. Whereas if you're dealing with a general audience, you would not want that so much. I'm going to skip over this and just show some examples. This comes from the JPS Bible, which is a pretty standard transliteration system. You can see here on the screen. This is just to show you different proposals that I've seen throughout different aspects of life and study. Here's Lev Shalem, which is a common Siddur or prayer book. You can see some of the ways that they've transliterated here. This is a interesting transliteration that I found in the English version of the Ben Ish Chai, which is a Sephardic halachic work, which is very confusing to see, as you can see here. And when you find an example over here, it's very confusing. And you can see this is kind of a narrow transliteration system, even though it's meant for a general audience. Sorry about the scan here; it's a little weird, but this is a bencher or something you would use for Friday night Shabbat dinner for the Birkat Hamazon, this is translated in traditional Ashkenazi pronunciation. And here is a traditional Sephardic pronunciation, transliteration from the De Sola Pool Siddur of the Spanish and Portuguese synagogue in New York City. Here's another one from Haggadah Masotit, which is a new Haggadah for Passover. Here is a Spanish transliteration. Okay, so I'm going to skip over and just go. I want to show how I have started to transliterate things. So I don't transliterate aleph because it has a zero sound. It's only used sometimes in a glottal stop. When I have a particle before I separate it out like this, ha space geffen, gafen, or geffen if you're Sephardic, which is a non-traditional. A lot of them would use hyphens or just put them together. I separate them out. The bet and the vet, or you could just have bet depending on your pronunciation. Gimel, dalet is just with a D. The hey, I always include a hey at the end to note that it's there. Vav, zayin. I use TS for the sadi. This is het. I've been using the underlined H, hametz. It's easy to use when you're typing and makes sense. I also use TS for sadi. We'll get to that later. Tet with a T. If you're Yemenite, you would pronounce it tet, and you could write it with a line underneath like that. For the yod, I've used the Y, kaf, lamed, these are all. Mem, nun, samech, I've used the S. Ayin, I used the apostrophe like this. So ma'ariv, shema, erev, to note that that's there. Modern Israeli and Ashkenazi would not pronounce this. They would just say Marav, Shema, Erev. You could also I have a few other options, but I've over time ended up with the apostrophe. The Pe and the Fe, Sadi, I use like TS. Except for words that are well known, sometimes I would just use the Z just because it's more known. Some people prefer double S to get the Sadi pronunciation that's associated with Sephardic pronunciation. With the Qaf, I've used the Q, so lehadlik, instead of with the K. Resh, sin and sheen, like that. Taf, like this. The vowels I've written like this: hirik, sere, segol, petach, kamas, shuruk, kubutz, and the sheva. Okay, there's a few notes here. Sere and segol I pronounce the same in my pronunciation tradition, but I write them separately just to note that they're different. The vowel is different. With the sheva, this is a difficult one to figure out how to do. Some use an E, some use an apostrophe. So I have doubled up with the apostrophe here. So this is the only inconsistency in my transliteration system, which is that I do have the apostrophe meaning either an ayin or a shava, depending on the context. And this is just a repeat. So when I would transliterate something, let me see if I can go back here a little bit. So let's look at the this things here. I'm going to exit out for a second so I can write this. I'm going to just type into it how I would transliterate this. So the Shema would be like this: Shema Yisrael. I'm going to put Hashem because I'm writing. Elokenu. Hashem Ehad. Okay. So Yisrael, I would, if I was being fully consistent, I would write it like this, but because it's a common name, I'm going to write it like that. However, I do use the EI here, Elokenu, even though I pronounce it Segol and Sere the same. However, Ashkenazi would pronounce it Einu and El, so there is a difference there. The second one I would write like this: Ashre, even though I pronounce it like this: Ashre, Yosh, Beteha, Old, Yehalelucha, Selah. Hallelujah. Just making sure I got everything correct. Okay, so there are a few notes here. Let me do this actually. Okay, I'm gonna reread this and just make it Veteha. The problem that I have is that my pronunciation is a little different, my liturgical pronunciation. So let me do this in kind of standard Israeli first, and then I'll read it my own way. So Ashrei Yoshve Vetecha Old Yehalelucha Selah. That's standard modern Israeli Hebrew. When I'm reading liturgical pronunciation, I would say Ashrei Yoshbe Betecha Old Yehalelucha Selah. So I don't distinguish between vet and vet liturgically. Then we go down here, Ashrei, and my pronunciation, Ashrei Ha'am, Shekacha Lo, Ashrei Ha'am, She Hashem Yuhevavhe Elokav. Just so you know that it's typical not to write the he when saying this in writing. So this, I'm following some traditions here with that. This is not an exact transliteration because of the nature of what I'm transliterating, but so here I'm going to read this third line in my own pronunciation translation, my own pronunciation tradition. Ashrei ha'am shekachalo, Ashrei ha'am she Hashem Elokav. You could also say Elokau if you were Yemenite. Elokau. Okay. I'm just going to keep going here really quickly. Tov Hashem lakol v'veraha mav al kol ma'asav. Okay. And I'll just read it in my own pronunciation. Tob Hashem lakol verahamav al kol ma'asav. Okay. And the last one is, I'm going to make this just a little bigger. I'm having trouble reading some of the text. So the last one is poteach et yadecha umasbi'a lechol rason. Okay. Poteach et yadecha umasbi'a lechol rason. So that's just to show how to transliterate Hebrew, where I am with the topic right now. I hope you enjoyed this brief presentation, and don't forget to like and share and subscribe to the channel. Thank you. Have a good day.